Joseph Stalin was born in the town of Gori in eastern Georgia, the son of Bessarion Djugashvili and Ketavan Galadze, and he later married twice, first to Kato Svanidze and then to Nadezhda Alliluyeva. The future leader became closely tied to the Bolshevik underground, formed alliances with Vladimir Lenin's circle, and developed a guarded personal style that limited his private friendships. Relationships with his children, particularly with Yakov and Vasily, were strained by secrecy, security pressures, and the demands of office. Within the upper ranks, Stalin relied on a changing cadre of loyalists, promoting figures like Vyacheslav Molotov while isolating perceived rivals through surveillance and party discipline. As leader, Stalin oversaw rapid industrialization, forced collectivization, and severe political repression that reshaped the Soviet Union's society and economy. He directed the war effort after the German invasion, centralized decision-making, and projected an image of wartime leadership tied closely to the Red Army victory. The purges of the 1930s, the Gulag system, and mass deportations defined the domestic climate, while post-war consolidation placed Eastern Europe under Soviet influence. His public image inside the country combined state-sponsored adulation with a pervasive security apparatus that reached into every level of public life, leaving a legacy of both industrial expansion and profound human cost. Stalin suffered a debilitating stroke at his dacha near Moscow in early March 1953, and he died soon afterward amid confusion about timely medical intervention. His body was initially embalmed and placed beside Lenin within the mausoleum on Red Square, reflecting an effort to align his memory with the founding revolutionary pantheon. Party leadership soon reconsidered this arrangement during the early period of de-Stalinization, which sought to reduce his prominence in official memory while preserving state continuity. The decision set the stage for a more modest, though still central, commemoration. In October 1961, Stalin's remains were removed from the mausoleum and reinterred at the Kremlin Wall necropolis along Red Square in Moscow. The gravesite sits among the markers and busts of Soviet leaders, heroes, and cultural figures arranged along the Kremlin's red brick wall. The site includes a bust and a name plaque, and it is visited regularly by organized delegations, foreign tourists, and those drawn by the historical significance of the Soviet period. Flowers appear on significant anniversaries, including the date of death and major wartime commemorations, reflecting contested public memory that has shifted with changing political climates. The transition from a place beside Lenin to a dedicated grave at the wall marked a calculated repositioning of Stalin's memory. The burial retains a central state backdrop, yet it situates him among a broader collective of Soviet dead rather than at the revolutionary focal point. This adjustment mirrors the state's attempt to balance acknowledgement of wartime leadership with a critical reassessment of the purges and the structures of repression associated with his rule. Mao Zedong was born in Hunan province to a farming family, later marrying several times, with Jiang Qing becoming the most politically visible spouse. He built close ties with the Communist Party's revolutionary generation, including Zhou Enlai and Zhu Dai, while fostering rivalries within the leadership that shaped policy debates. Mao's relationship with his children was mediated by long periods of war, security needs, and party demands, and he relied on a protective inner circle that managed access, medical care, and daily routines. By the mid-1960s, Mao's personal authority intertwined with party structures, placing family and allies within a carefully controlled political environment. As the People's Republic's top leader, Mao directed land reform, collectivization, and campaigns that aimed to transform society. The Great Leap Forward caused widespread famine, reshaping internal power balances and prompting later adjustments in governance. The Cultural Revolution, beginning in 1966, mobilized youth and disrupted institutions, while consolidating the leader's image as a revolutionary figure. Internationally, China's standing shifted from early alignment with the Soviet Union to rivalry, and later to a cautious opening marked by diplomacy with the United States. Mao's public legacy blended ideological ambition with profound social and cultural upheaval. Mao died in September 1976 in Beijing after a prolonged period of declining health that was managed by his medical team and senior aides. The leadership moved quickly to stabilize the party, neutralizing the so-called Gang of Four and preparing for a transition that elevated successors through collective arrangements. Embalming was chosen, reflecting a decision to maintain a permanent public presence and to locate remembrance within the capital's ceremonial core. The body was placed in a crystal casket with viewing protocols shaped by security and state ceremony. The Chairman Mao Memorial Hall stands at the southern end of Tiananmen Square, facing Chang'an Avenue, integrating the tomb into the national ceremonial axis. Visitors enter through controlled lines, pass security checks, and move through a solemn hall where offerings of flowers are common on significant anniversaries. The building's exterior and interior design emphasize austere materials, portraits, and inscriptions that center the state narrative of revolutionary continuity. The square's scale and the hall's placement assert proximity to national institutions, including the Great Hall of the People, reinforcing the link between memory and governance. Mao's preservation in a public hall presents a curated, enduring state narrative, distinguishing his commemoration from traditional burial practices. The setting underscores the revolution's institutional legacy while acknowledging the profound disruptions associated with the political campaigns of his era. Benito Mussolini was born in northern Italy to a blacksmith father and a schoolteacher mother, and he later married Rachele Guidi, with whom he had children. He built relationships with early fascist organizers, squadristi leaders, and military allies who helped consolidate power after the March on Rome. The regime elevated family as part of a public image. Yet Mussolini maintained overlapping personal relationships that were managed by the state's press apparatus and police networks. His inner circle combined loyalists and opportunists whose fortunes rose and fell with shifting priorities and wartime setbacks. As head of government, Mussolini established a one-party state, controlled the press, and pursued corporatist economic policy while promoting imperial expansion in Africa and intervention in the Spanish Civil War. He aligned with Nazi Germany through the Pact of Steel, steering Italy into the Second World War with strained resources and poor strategic outcomes. Military defeats, domestic hardship, and the collapse of alliances weakened the regime, while internal dissent grew among elites and the monarchy. Public monuments and ritualized gatherings shaped a durable cult of personality that outlasted many of the regime's institutions. The decline accelerated in 1943 when the Grand Council voted against Mussolini, leading to his arrest and the formation of the Italian Social Republic under German protection. In April 1945, he attempted to flee toward the Swiss border, was captured near Lake Como, and was executed by partisans. His body, along with others, was brought to Milan and publicly displayed at Piazzale Loreto, a site chosen for its earlier executions, where crowds gathered in a moment of retributive symbolism. The remains were later taken into custody, beginning a long post-mortem saga that included a theft from the cemetery in 1946 and eventual recovery by authorities. After years of disputes and negotiation with the family, Mussolini's remains were transferred to the Mussolini family crypt in the San Cassiano Cemetery in Predappio. The crypt features a marble sarcophagus, photographs, and memorabilia arranged by relatives, and it draws steady streams of visitors, including organized groups and curious tourists. Local authorities have periodically set rules for access and conduct, balancing public order with the rights of the family to receive visitors. Flowers and inscriptions appear on anniversaries of birth and death, and the crypt remains one of the most visited sites in the town. The contrast between the vast public stage of Mussolini's rule and the enclosed family crypt reflects the contraction of a once national cult into a localized memorial. Predappio's site, rooted in family custody and municipal oversight, illustrates how Italy has managed the legacy of fascism in the realm of funerary memory and public history. Pol Pot, born Saloth Sar in Kampong Tom province, emerged from a modest family with connections to rural Buddhism and local patronage. He studied in Phnom Penh and spent formative years in Paris, where political networks shaped his ideological direction and personal ties. He later partnered with Q Poneri, whose sister, Q Thirith, and brother-in-law, Ieng Sari, formed part of a close revolutionary circle. Inside the Communist Party of Kampuchea, relationships with Nuon Chea, Son Sen, and other senior figures combined secrecy, pseudonyms, and compartmentalized operations that limited outside knowledge of internal debates. As leader of Democratic Kampuchea, Pol Pot presided over radical agrarian policies that emptied cities, dismantled institutions, and imposed harsh labor and surveillance. The regime's security organs ran detention centers, most notoriously S-21 in Phnom Penh, documenting arrests, forced confessions, and executions. Foreign policy produced deep isolation while conflicts with Vietnam escalated into war. By late 1978, Vietnamese forces invaded, the regime collapsed, and core leadership retreated to border zones. Pol Pot continued to influence insurgent factions, sustained by cross-border supply and a fragmented coalition. Pol Pot's health declined during years of flight and internal purges that reshaped the movement's command. In April 1998, he died near An Long Vang while under house arrest by rival Khmer Rouge elements, with officials reporting heart failure. The death occurred shortly after announcements that the group might hand him over to an international tribunal, a development that further fractured remaining cadres. Local commanders organized a swift cremation, reflecting both practical constraints and efforts to avoid external scrutiny. The cremation site grave lies near An Long Veng, close to the Thai border, in a simple, informal setting marked by a modest mound and occasional offerings. The grave's materials are basic, often described as a mixture of ash, soil, and a canopy or shelter assembled from local supplies. Visitors, including researchers and curious travelers, reach it via unpaved roads, and the site has few formal interpretive signs. The surrounding area includes remnants of late-period Khmer Rouge settlements, providing context for the movement's final years. The restrained character of the grave, distant from national monuments and urban cemeteries, mirrors the regime's isolation at the end and the absence of state-sanctioned commemoration. It stands as a sparse physical trace of a leadership that left extensive documentary evidence of control while leaving little formal memorialization for itself. Kim Jong-il was born into the family that founded the North Korean state, the son of Kim Il-sung and the father of Kim Jong-un, forming a dynastic line that combined family authority with party control. He cultivated relationships within the Workers' Party, the military, and the security services, balancing factions through appointments and ceremonial recognition. Publicly, Kim emphasized filial devotion to his father, used cultural production to shape image, and elevated his sister, Kim Kyung-hoi, and her husband, Jang Song-taek, within the leadership. Succession planning brought Kim Jong-un forward, while other relatives were positioned in supporting roles across the propaganda and defense establishments. As leader, Kim oversaw a system centered on the party, the military, and a dense network of internal surveillance. The state pursued nuclear and missile programs that redefined regional security, while severe economic stress produced widespread hardship and constrained access to information. The leadership maintained loyalty through privileges for core elite groups and ritualized public events, including anniversaries tied to the ruling family. Cultural institutions, from film studios to performance troupes, reinforced narratives of continuity, sacrifice, and national resilience. In December 2011, Kim died during travel, with state media attributing the death to a heart-related event. The transition to Kim Jong-un proceeded rapidly, managed by senior cadres who framed the succession as a direct extension of the founding lineage. Public mourning was carefully choreographed in Pyongyang, featuring formal processions, mass gatherings, and televised ceremonies designed to show unity. Embalming was ordered to preserve an enduring presence within the capital's principal memorial venue. Kim's remains lie in the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun, a former official residence converted into a mausoleum that also houses Kim Il-sung. Visitors follow a tightly controlled route through security stations, shoe-cleaning corridors, and conveyor passages into viewing halls. The body rests in a glass sarcophagus, with decorations that include honors, decorations, and personal items displayed in adjacent rooms. The complex functions as a focal point for state ritual, with seasonal visits by work units, military delegations, and foreign guests. The palace's ceremonial environment reinforces the family's central roles and the continuity of rule. The arrangement places Kim within a constructed lineage of leadership and national identity, linking memory, governance, and displays of allegiance in a single, permanent setting. Francisco Franco was born in Galicia to a naval family and married Carmen Polo, whose discretion and influence shaped household life and social alliances. He relied on a network of senior officers, Falangist leaders, and technocrats. Balancing rival currents through appointments and institutional oversight, the couple's daughter, Carmen Franco, occupied a visible role in ceremonial life, while extended relatives participated in charitable and cultural bodies linked to the regime. Franco cultivated ties with the monarchy's supporters, positioning Juan Carlos as successor to secure continuity under a restored crown. As head of state, Franco consolidated power after the Civil War, banned opposition parties, and maintained rigid censorship in culture and media. The security apparatus, military courts, and press controls structured daily life and limited dissent. Economic policy shifted over time, from autarky to gradual liberalization managed by technocrats associated with the Opus Dei circle. Internationally, Spain moved from wartime isolation to later integration with Western institutions, while internal opposition grew among workers, students, and regional movements. Franco's health deteriorated in 1975 after a series of medical crises, and he died in November in Madrid. A state funeral followed, and the remains were placed in the Valley of the Fallen, a monumental site that combined basilica, memorial cross, and an ossuary for Civil War dead. The location and scale gave his burial a symbolic status that linked the regime's narrative to a national monument. Over time, debates intensified over the site's meaning, its construction history, and the framing of reconciliation. In October 2019, following legal and political decisions by Spanish authorities, Franco's remains were exhumed from the Valley of the Fallen. The family transfer occurred under controlled conditions, and the remains were reinterred at Mingarubio Cemetery in El Pardo, Madrid. The gravesite sits within a guarded, conventional cemetery environment, with access managed by security protocols that reflect ongoing sensitivities. The marker is comparatively modest in scale, and the site lacks the monumental framing of the previous location. The move from a grand national memorial to a standard cemetery plot reframed Franco's public memory within a democratic legal context. The reinterment reduced the symbolic prominence of the burial while preserving lawful custodianship and public order, aligning commemoration with contemporary policy and historical reassessment. Idi Amin was born in northwestern Uganda and rose through the colonial king's African rifles, forming bonds with fellow soldiers that later shaped his patronage networks. He married multiple times, expanding a large family whose members intersected with state business, security services, and ceremonial life. Relationships with senior officers, intelligence heads, and regional power brokers sustained his rule, while rivalries inside the army and exiled opposition figures pressured the regime. Amin relied on personal loyalty, reinforced by material rewards and frequent rotations of key commanders. Amin seized power in the early 1970s, suspended many constitutional constraints, and governed through decrees and military orders. The expulsion of the Asian community in 1972, carried out with short deadlines, transformed commerce and property ownership while damaging the economy. Security agencies and ad hoc units detained opponents, and disappearances and extrajudicial killings were widely reported. Foreign policy involved shifting alliances, including support from Libya and confrontations with neighboring states, which culminated in war with Tanzania after incursions near the border. The regime unraveled in early 1979 when Tanzanian forces and Ugandan exiles advanced toward Kampala, sending Amin into flight. He lived in exile in Saudi Arabia, where his family maintained a low profile under the protection of the host state. In 2003, he died in Jeddah after a prolonged illness that drew renewed attention to unresolved legal and human rights claims. Requests for repatriation were debated, but the return to Uganda proceeded on terms set by surviving family members and local authorities. Amin was buried in Bombo, a town north of Kampala with military associations from the colonial and post-colonial eras. The grave lies within a family cemetery area marked by a modest headstone with maintenance carried out by relatives and local caretakers. Ceremonies have been private and restrained, reflecting the contested memory of his rule and the sensitivities of communities affected by past violence. Visitors are limited, and the site has no formal national markers or interpretive displays. The quiet interment in Bombo places a former head of state within a family setting rather than a national monument. The location acknowledges personal ties to place while distancing state institutions from formal commemoration, a balance shaped by the legacy of repression and the politics of remembrance in Uganda. Nicolae Ceausescu was born in southern Romania to a peasant family and married Elena Petrescu, whose influence extended across party and state institutions. The couple cultivated an image of disciplined partnership that was reinforced through ceremonial appearances, shared titles, and the placement of relatives in areas of research and administration. Ceausescu built relationships within the Romanian Communist Party by promoting loyal cadres, while reshaping the security services to protect the leadership. Their children appeared in public settings and held positions within cultural and economic bodies, reflecting the regime's emphasis on family-centered authority. As General Secretary and Head of State, Ceausescu steered a personalist dictatorship that combined nationalist rhetoric with strict control over public life. Policies aimed at rapid debt repayment produced austerity, fuel shortages, and rationing that defined daily experience in the 1980s. The Securitate maintained pervasive surveillance, and dissent was sanctioned through labor disciplinary measures and legal proceedings. Internationally, Ceausescu sought an independent line within the Eastern Bloc, earning attention for foreign policy gestures while tightening domestic control. Urban restructuring, including the large-scale systematization program in Bucharest, altered historic neighborhoods and created monumental administrative spaces. The regime faced growing unrest in late 1989 as protests spread from Timișoara to the capital. Ceausescu and Elena attempted to retain control through public addresses and emergency orders, but the security and military apparatus fragmented under pressure. The couple fled Bucharest by helicopter, were captured by military units, and subjected to a brief tribunal on charges related to abuses of power and public violence. On December 25, 1989, they were executed by firing squad at a military site, marking the abrupt end of the leadership. The bodies were buried quickly at Ghencia Cemetery in Bucharest, within the military section, with limited ceremony and restricted access. For years, uncertainties about the exact placement and identification circulated among the public, reflecting the haste and conditions of the period. In 2010, authorities approved an exhumation to verify the remains through forensic examination and family DNA samples. After confirmation, the graves received updated markers, including names and dates, and the plots became accessible to visitors and researchers. Ceausescu's burial in a standard military cemetery rather than a monumental setting aligns with the new state's repudiation of the personality cult. The site is orderly and public, and it reflects a transition from an era of tightly managed symbolism to a framework of documentation, verification, and measured remembrance. Slobodan Milosevic was born in Požarevac and married Mirjana Markovic, a sociologist who founded and led the Yugoslav Left, a party that operated in alliance with his Socialist Party. Their partnership shaped personnel decisions and propaganda, while their children, Marko and Maria, figured in public controversies tied to business and security. Milosevic's inner circle included party officials, state security leaders, and media executives who coordinated messaging and managed opposition pressure. Relationships within the federal presidency and with Serbian provincial authorities evolved as he consolidated influence over institutions and regional politics. As president of Serbia, and later of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, Milosevic presided over a period marked by nationalist mobilization, wars in Croatia and Bosnia, and international sanctions. State media amplified government narratives, while opposition parties, civic groups, and independent journalists faced harassment and legal constraints. Security services and paramilitary formations played roles in the conflicts, and negotiations with international mediators produced intermittent ceasefires and accords. The Kosovo crisis culminated in a North Atlantic Treaty Organization air campaign, further isolating the country and deepening economic and political strain. Milosevic lost power following mass protests in October 2000, triggered by disputed elections and a general strike that unified opposition forces. In 2001, he was arrested by Serbian authorities and transferred to the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague, where he conducted much of his own defense. In March 2006, he died in the tribunal's detention unit, with officials citing heart-related causes amid a history of cardiovascular illness. The trial ended without a verdict, leaving legal findings incomplete and public debate unresolved. His burial took place in the garden of the family home in Požarevac, a private property that became a focal point for sympathizers and critics. The grave is marked by a simple stone and is located near a memorial plaque, with access regulated by the family and local authorities. Ceremonial elements included speeches by party associates and attendance by supporters, while foreign dignitaries were limited. The setting emphasizes personal and partisan remembrance over state recognition, reflecting the political divisions that persisted after his death. The choice of a family garden rather than a national cemetery signaled the absence of official honors and the contested nature of his legacy. The site's modest scale situates memory within a domestic space, aligning commemoration with private custody and local control rather than formal state ritual. Ruhollah Khomeini was born in central Iran to a family with clerical lineage, trained in seminaries at Arak and Qom, and married Khadijeh Saqafi, whose quiet presence anchored a large household. His sons, Ahmad and Mostafa, worked within clerical and political networks that supported the movement, while students and disciples formed an enduring circle across seminaries in Qom and Najaf. Exile years in Najaf and later in France expanded Khomeini's ties to activists, publishers, and broadcasters who carried messages into Iran. Relationships with senior clerics ranged from cooperative to adversarial, reflecting differences over authority, jurisprudence, and the reach of theocratic rule. Khomeini led the coalition that toppled the monarchy in early 1979, establishing the Islamic Republic and the doctrine of guardianship of the jurist as a constitutional principle. Institutions such as the Guardian Council, the Revolutionary Guards, and revolutionary courts structured political life, while cultural and educational policies reshaped public norms. The state confronted internal opposition and a prolonged war with Iraq that mobilized vast resources and reinforced the leadership's authority. International relations were defined by the embassy crisis, sanctions, and efforts to build new alliances, while clerical networks consolidated influence over law and policy. Khomeini's health declined in the late 1980s, and he died in June 1989 in Tehran after surgery and intensive care. The funeral drew exceptionally large crowds, and repeated ceremonies were arranged to manage public attendance and preserve dignity after disruptions caused by the size of the gathering. The leadership moved to confirm succession mechanisms, elevating Ali Khamenei to the role of supreme leader and establishing a framework for ongoing clerical oversight. Decisions regarding commemoration aimed to create a permanent shrine that would accommodate pilgrimage, state ceremony, and international visitors. The mausoleum of Ruhollah Khomeini stands in South Tehran near the Behesht-e Zahra Cemetery complex on the road to Qom. The site includes expansive courtyards, prayer halls, and auxiliary buildings designed to host large religious events, national commemorations, and visiting delegations. Construction has proceeded in stages, with the shrine's domes, minarets, and interior calligraphy evolving over time and transport links established through metro and highway connections. Adjacent development includes cultural institutions, seminar facilities, and service areas that integrate the shrine into the city's ceremonial landscape. Khomeini's burial in a monumental complex places clerical leadership at the center of national memory and infrastructure. The shrine functions as both a religious destination and a state venue, aligning commemoration with the constitutional role that he shaped and with the institutions that continue to administer public life. Ferdinand Marcos was born in Ilocos Norte to a politically connected provincial family and married Imelda Romualdez, whose public profile and cultural initiatives amplified the couple's visibility. Their children, Aimee, Ferdinand Jr., and Irene, entered public life through youth organizations and later political roles, reinforcing a family-centered network. Marcos relied on close relationships with military commanders, technocrats, and provincial allies, distributing resources and appointments that bound local elites to the presidency. The household's inner circle coordinated travel, medical care, and public appearances, maintaining a ceremonial image that projected stability. As president, Marcos declared martial law in the early 1970s, centralized authority, and curtailed civil liberties through decrees and military jurisdiction. Economic programs pursued infrastructure and showcase projects, while public borrowing expanded and corruption allegations surrounded procurement and favored businesses. Media controls and security operations constrained opposition, while student groups, labor unions, and regional movements organized clandestinely and abroad. International relationships balanced alliance with the United States, regional diplomacy, and efforts to manage criticism over human rights. The regime weakened in the mid-1980s amid economic crisis, contested elections, and the rise of a broad opposition coalition. In February 1986, mass demonstrations known as the People Power Movement converged in Manila, and senior military figures defected, accelerating a transfer of power. Marcos and his family departed for Hawaii, where they lived in exile under close public scrutiny and ongoing legal disputes over assets. He died in Honolulu in 1989, his remains preserved while negotiations over repatriation and burial continued. After prolonged debate, the government allowed interment at Libingan ng mga Bayani in Taguig in 2016, presenting the decision as adherence to regulations for a former head of state and soldier. The burial, carried out with limited advance notice, took place with military honors and sparked protests and legal challenges that reflected unresolved historical assessments. The grave lies within a national cemetery dedicated to military personnel and senior officials, marked by a standard headstone and maintained under armed forces protocols. Visitors include supporters who regard the burial as recognition of service and critics who view it as a revision of public memory. The placement at a national heroes cemetery formalized state custody while intensifying public debate over legacy and accountability. The site's official setting aligns the burial with institutional practice, even as civil society continues to contest the meaning of honors afforded to a former authoritarian leader. Rafael Trujillo was born in San Cristobal to a lower middle-class family and married several times, with Maria Martinez Alba, and later Maria de Los Angeles Martinez, being the most publicly recognized spouses. The Trujillo clan, including siblings and children, occupied roles in business, culture, and provincial administration, embedding family interests into the state. His inner circle featured military commanders, secret police leaders, and civilian administrators whose advancement depended on personal loyalty. Patronage extended to allied elites, while informers and security officers enforced control over social and political life. As ruler of the Dominican Republic, Trujillo built a highly centralized system that fused the armed forces, the party, and the economy under his influence. The regime's security services targeted dissidents, while censorship and propaganda upheld a cult of personality across media and public ceremonies. Internationally, relations oscillated between cooperation and criticism, particularly after events such as the Parsley Massacre on the Haitian border. Over time, disgruntled officers and exiles coordinated efforts to weaken the regime, and covert actions increased the risk to the leadership. In May 1961, gunmen ambushed Trujillo's car on a road outside Santo Domingo, killing him and triggering a rapid contest for power among loyalists and opponents. Family members and allies tried to preserve the system, but pressure from domestic resistance and external actors eroded their position. The body was at first entombed in the capital before transfers abroad were arranged to reduce the rallying effect of a prominent local burial. Subsequent relocations reflected shifting political calculations and the family's desire for a more private setting. Trujillo's remains were ultimately reburied in Spain, with widely cited accounts placing the tomb in the family pantheon at the Cementerio Domingo Rubio in the El Pardo area of Madrid. The site is part of a guarded cemetery complex that includes burial plots of other political figures, and access operates under standard municipal rules. The marker identifies the family vault, and floral offerings appear on anniversaries observed by relatives and a small number of supporters. The Spanish location distances the burial from the public spaces of the Dominican Republic and limits large-scale commemorative gatherings. The reburial abroad underscores the enduring sensitivities surrounding Trujillo's memory and the state's efforts to avoid the political uses of a domestic shrine. Placement within a family pantheon in a conventional cemetery frames remembrance as private, while historical evaluations continue in academic, legal, and civic forms. Enver Hoxha was born in Gjirokastar to a merchant family and married Nekshmije Shuglini, whose political activity and later leadership of cultural institutions made her a prominent partner. The couple's household intersected with party life, and their children grew up within elite circles shaped by security protocols and ideological education. Hoxha relied on long-serving comrades from the wartime period, including Mehmet Shehu before their rupture, and maintained strict oversight of the security services. Purges and demotions reconfigured relationships within the Party of Labor, reinforcing personal authority and isolating potential rivals. As Albania's leader, Hoxha pursued a rigid form of state socialism, marked by autarky, atheism policies, and a pervasive internal security apparatus. Ideological disputes led to successive breaks with Yugoslavia, the Soviet Union, and later China, leaving the country increasingly isolated. Industrial and agricultural plans emphasized self-reliance, while surveillance and political trials enforced conformity. The landscape was reshaped by bunker construction, border fortifications, and standardized public architecture that expressed a defensive national stance and centralized control. Hoxha's health declined in the early 1980s, and he died in 1985 in Tirana after years of medical oversight. The succession elevated Ramiz Alia, who sustained the system while adjusting rhetoric and policy to shifting conditions. Initial commemorations reflected the cult of leadership, with ceremonies that highlighted wartime credentials and ideological consistency. Public space, media, and education marked the passing with carefully scripted narratives that emphasized continuity and vigilance. After the collapse of the communist system, authorities altered the treatment of Hoxha's memory and burial. His remains, once associated with prominent sites and honors, were transferred to Shara Cemetery in Tirana, a more conventional municipal setting. The grave features a modest marker and receives intermittent visits from researchers, former supporters, and curious travelers. Maintenance follows standard cemetery routines without the heightened symbolism that characterized earlier memorials. The move to Shara Cemetery signaled a deliberate reduction of the former leader's monumental presence in public life. The burial's ordinary context aligns with broader efforts to document the period while distancing contemporary institutions from the personality cult that dominated the previous era.